empowered people make informed decisions that lead to living a life without regret. This is Sara Khaki and Shawna Woods from Atlanta Divorce Law Group, and this is the Happily Ever After Divorce Podcast. Welcome to the Happily Ever After Divorce Podcast. This is Sara Khaki with Atlanta Divorce Law Group, and I'm joined by our very own managing partner, Shawna Woods. And today we are going to discuss the other players who are playing a part in your divorce, even though they're not your spouse. So, Shawna, as a divorce attorney in a family law firm, we see this a lot. The mom, the dad, the sibling, the father-in-law, the mother-in-law, other players on the chess set that you have to look out for and you have to put into your divorce strategy considerations because they may be in the ear of the other side or they may be in the ear of your client. From your perspective, Shawna, and especially in strategy, how do you see this usually playing out and how do you suss it out? Of knowing, okay, I'm not really against the ex-husband. I'm against the ex-husband's father. Or I'm not really up against the mom, right? If I'm representing the dad, I'm up against the mom's new boyfriend or husband. It gets interesting. So talk me through it.
It does get interesting. And although we're saying other players in a divorce, it could be other players in whatever family law litigation you're having. To Sarah's point, she brought up new spouse, which is one of my least favorites.
And a custody modification too.
Custody modification.
Yeah.
I'm laughing a little bit. Please don't take that as we take this lightly. It's just that we see these patterns over and over and again, and it can greatly affect a case negatively, both when your client or the other party is being heavily influenced by someone else, whether it is their own parents, and a lot of times it is parental, or the new paramour, or the new husband/wife. These situations really do raise the level of complexity and probably the level of how much you're going to spend on your case. And I'd like to give you an example of a good use of other people in your divorce case, and then an example of kind of a bad use, if I can. So let's start with a good use. I've got a client right now, really wonderful, lovely lady whose sibling is definitely involved. They were there at the initial consult. They are included in all emails, um, in any strategy we do. They're there because the client herself is in such a fragile state that she needs to lean on somebody in her family to remember to ask the hard questions she forgets to ask me, or to write down the things that I'm telling her so that they can follow up with her later and make sure that she's accomplishing the things we need her to accomplish to get through this divorce case. That is a good and appropriate use of someone else, another player, right, in the divorce, a very positive way. In contrast, we got a partner right now who we were just talking this morning. He's going through a custody modification, and it is our client's new spouse who is running the show and shouldn't be, because these are not his children. But he thinks because he's paying for the litigation,
For the attorney's fees, yeah.
He wants to dictate how things are going to go. And what happens is a lot of times this person, whoever it may be, the new spouse, a paramour, often in divorce cases, putting pressure on the client or the other party to do things in their viewpoint. Let's just break this apart a little bit. When you're in a new relationship, whether that's a marriage or whether it's an affair partner, right, that you were cheating on your spouse with, or you met them post separation, that they come in with their own kind of viewpoint of who you are, and you also are presenting your best self to them.
Right.
So you may not be giving them all of the information that they need to correctly assess their advice to you.
Right.
Now, hopefully, knock on wood, you are giving your attorney all of the correct information that they need to properly advise you. When it comes to parents, and I'm speaking as a parent, and I am speaking as a very overprotective sister of a very much younger brother who went through a divorce, I definitely wanted to be involved because I know very well the law, at least here in Georgia. It probably wouldn't have been very good for me to be overly involved because I am the protective older
Right.
sister.
It's hard to be objective.
I am the parent who comes in and says, "This person hurt my baby. I want them strung up and quartered in the town square." I fully respect parents who say that. Absolutely. It's not gonna happen. Please go ahead and take your child to dinner after I'm done speaking with them. But let's not have that here in this case, right? And so those kind of things can get very complicated and can complicate your divorce. One part, well, it could be one or more, that people don't talk about in the divorce, and especially when they're older, teenagers or even adults, the party's children. The party's children really feel like, and I'm going to talk about adult children right now. They really feel like they have the authority and the ability to tell their parents how to divorce.
Right.
And they don't. Not even when they're teenagers. They don't get a say in how the finances are divvied up. They don't get a say in spousal support. You know, a lot of times parents have a tendency to want their children to love and admire and respect them. And so they're only, again, giving one view of themselves to that child.
Yeah, and I think that that's the part where when I'm doing a consult and I see all the characters, right,
I know.
on the chess table of this divorce and the moving parts, sometimes you have to take a moment and look at your client and ask, who are we really divorcing? You know, we had a case like this. It's actually a case that you worked on. The client looked me in the face in the consult and said, I love my husband. My husband's a good man. For X, Y, and Z reasons, we're no longer in love. We're not going to be able to stay married. But my father-in-law is the one that's made this incredibly difficult because he had, even though his son was willing to do all the things that was right by our client, the father-in-law has such a grip on his son that he had certain demands and needs to come out of this divorce that turned what would have been a very amicable divorce into a very belligerent one. So, Shawna, if you recall this, we went into this knowing we're not divorcing the husband, we're divorcing the father-in-law. So one of the big questions I think you need to ask yourself is, who are you really divorcing here? And there is a definitely sometimes cultural components to this, because in different cultures, marriage doesn't just belong to two people, it belongs to a community of families. Two families come together and join together. So there's certain demands that the families have. And we see this a lot in some of the Indian divorces we do, where, you know, we have to answer to the families. The families have to be, and sometimes this is families that are still in the homeland in India, and they have to be answered to. So it creates a lot more noise for two people who are going through a divorce. And this is where it becomes, I think, challenging. And if you are one of the outside characters or players in somebody else's divorce, you got to be mindful of this is, you know, in a good divorce, you're able to, when I say a good divorce, I mean, when you get out with at least an outcome that gets you closer to what you came in with, the goals that you had in mind. I don't know if that word term is realistic or not, but you sit down and for yourself, whether it's with your divorce attorney, whether it's with your spiritual leader, whoever are the people who are part of your support system, whether it's with your friend, you think through 1 to 3 goals that are your priorities. These are main things that I really care about, right? It may have something to do with your parenting time. It may have something to do with some sort of a assets, might have something to do with the house, might have to do with being able to get through a certain period so you can graduate. Whatever your personal goals are that are tied in that divorce is what you would then present to your advocate, to your divorce attorney to fight for, right? That gets diluted to no end when there are so many chefs in the kitchen and everybody wants to add their goals and their objectives to it. And it becomes really hard for the person who is going through this to speak up against their support system and say, that's not what I want. What you're asking for is not what I want, but I feel obliged to you to give in to that because A, you may be paying for my attorney's fees, or B, you're part of my support system, or C, you've now become part of my identity when I kind of have felt like I'm in the dark and now I feel some sort of an attachment to you. And I think from our seat, we see it and we have to be very, very careful on the strings we pull through that because we're talking about the person's environment that is keeping them whole and sane right now. But that environment can actually muddy up this person's goals. And we both know this through the divorce process. You've come out with a good outcome if you've got 3 out of your goals achieved. More than that, it's less and less likely.
You're absolutely right. And I do think a lot of this is, especially with parents or a new spouse or a new paramour, eh, they want to advocate for you so hard. And I appreciate that. We do as divorce attorneys. And not all parents are overbearing. Some are quite lovely. And I've had great conversations with parents who just want to know what's going on. And then you have the parents who, like you said, are overly involved, right? Their way has to be taken in consideration, and you really do have to remind them gently who the client is, regardless of who is paying.
Right.
So, and I found myself in a very sticky situation. This has been, oh gosh, Sarah, maybe 16 years ago now, where a woman hired me to represent her daughter in a divorce case. And I'd spoken to the woman, the mother first, and then I reiterated, "That's great. Glad you're happy to take your daughter on as a client, but I have to talk to her privately." And she did sign a waiver and wanted me to tell her mom everything. When she was in front of her mom, she would say this.
Mm.
When we step away, she would say, "Can you tell my mom that you gave me this advice instead?"
Oh my gosh.
Right. A really bad situation. Now that is kind of a pinnacle of, I think, what you were talking about, is trying so hard to please this other individual, whether it's because they're supporting you financially or they're supporting you emotionally. You're losing sight of the ultimate client, the ultimate person who is you going through this situation. And knowing when to tell your person or your people, "I appreciate you so much. I'm gonna have to set a boundary here that between me and my attorney, that's private."
Yeah.
It's an important part of taking your power back because the last thing that you wanna do is replace giving your power to your spouse over to giving your power to someone else,
And you are at such risk of doing that when you're going through this because you have
especially with a
a
parent.
yes, because you have a certain structure that you've been operating under, and it has involved, making decisions with another person, evaluating, thinking through every decision with another person, bouncing ideas back and forth with another person. And, when we're going through that dark place of having to rip up that framework and figure out on our own, we're so vulnerable to taking that entire system, that operating system, and just putting another character in there instead of your ex spouse. And you're actually better off. You'll get the full gift of the divorce. And when I mean gift of the divorce, is that every problem carries with it a life lesson gift. And divorce is no different. So for whatever reason, now that you're going through this transition with the divorce, if you're able to squeeze the benefit, the juice out of it, you will come out of it as a person that is more empowered, more clear on who they are, has more understanding of what matters to them and what doesn't. And you will not get that full gift if you take your spouse out of the picture and you just stick another figure in there, be it mom, be it dad, be it a sibling, be it your adult child or your new love interest. That's what you got to watch out for. And it's also not fair to that person because they think they're just supporting you. So I really do think at the end of the day, you are in control of this. And I would say before you involve a person to come and be your side advocate throughout your entire process and be the person that you're going through this process with, be very clear for yourself on what are my priorities, what are my goals, and where do I want to end up 5 years after this. Relay that. That's your vision. Nobody can give that to you. That's your vision. Relay that to your advocate person, your family member, whoever's supporting you, and then ask them to be your vision advocate. This is my vision post-divorce. I want you to be my vision advocate for that. I think that's the most helpful way you can get somebody to help you through this process. Now, that's if you're the person on this end. On the other end, if we're representing somebody, let's go back to the case we talked about where we were clear that we're not divorcing the spouse, we're divorcing the ex-husband. I think hiring a law firm or hiring a divorce attorney that has a conversation with you at the onset on strategy that goes deep enough that understands that on the other side, there are other players and what could those other players potentially be planting in the ear of our opposing party. And what are the other interests our opposing party has to please, right? Like when we have a divorce, for instance, let's say we have go back to the example of an Indian divorce. One of the questions I ask, okay, what does his family think about this? Well, his family's very upset with him. His family thinks that this is very shameful. They want us to work on it. They don't want us to do anything until this point, or they want us to go back to India and have a meeting amongst the families and then discuss it further. Okay, so that is important to know that he has this other pressure on him, right? There's other factors that have nothing to do with money, have nothing to do with the assets, none of the legal stuff, none of the typical legal language, but some personal pressure, emotional pressure, cultural pressures that is weighing on him, and it's going to weigh on his decision making. That can paint so much for us in our strategy building.
Yeah, and I just want to circle back to a phrase you used, and I think it's a very powerful and lovely phrase. You said the vision advocate.
Husband?
And I really do think that's important to share with your person, not just your vision, but if the vision changes going
Right.
along, right? This is the vision advocate. And then to circle back about who's on the other side and who am I really negotiating with, that's a very important key to pick up on immediately. Whether it's the opposing party is letting their attorney actually just run with it, and they're not really taking into consideration what the opposing party wants. It's the attorney you're negotiating with, right? Or like in our case, whether I'm negotiating with the father-in-law because
Right.
he's the one who really ran the family and ran the finances. And you're right. We've done a lot of Indian divorces, and I've done a lot of them over the years. And especially if they are first generation here, there's a lot of family involvement. And the first time I encountered this, I was taken aback because that's not my normal. But after understanding what their normal was, it gives the attorney the space to say, okay, I understand that there are other voices that you are going to listen to. Do you want to invite them all into the conversation right now, or are you going to share this
Right.
information with them? And making sure we have that distinction of what we can and can't share with their vision advocates.
I love that. Thank you, Shawna.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Happily Ever After Divorce podcast. If you'd like to learn more, go to atlantadivorcelawgroup.com/resources.